Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of The Romance and the Plight of Neoliberalist Antihero in Breaking Bad and Cyberpunk Edgerunners.
It is so exciting and joyful to talk about anti-hero today in this podcast. I believe most of our audience have watched some anti-hero movies or televisions.
Kaiji, we know antihero movies and televisions are super popular recently and receive a mountain of positive comments.
Right, for the week of June 6 to 12, 2022, The Boys, a recent example of popular anti-hero web series, have 990 millions per minute view.
Went out with a banger with 10.3 million viewers tuning into its series finale. It got 96 tomato meters average and 97 average audiences score on Rotten Tomato. All in all, Antihero is successful. Let's get into the topic.
I understand that the reason for the success of the anti-hero is multidimensional, and it may be because the anti-hero, for example Walter White, a talented chemistry teacher in Breaking Bad, presents more as ordinary people than the superheroes of the traditional hero movies, like Superman. This may also be because in the face of various difficulties, when people are eager to escape from the predicament, those anti-heroes is close to the antidote to the spiritual and life stress under civilized life than the perfect superpower. In other words, the anti-hero works on the life problems of ordinary people.
Yes, but some contradicting opinions state a different point of view. Film reviewer Avishwar Roy states, society has molded us into believing that good relationships aren't interesting. The good people are boring, and that's why heroes are a big thing right now. There is an obsession with toxicity in romance. She believes that anti-hero appeals to audiences because of people's sympathy and instinct to repair wounds. The anti-hero is often a criminal or a moral character for tragic or unavoidable reasons. In this situation, the audience is often actively forgiving the moral behaviors of these anti-heroes and trying to dress them to be correct.
In fact, these two statements refer to the same thing. Empathy for anti-heroes fosters audience adoration for anti-heroes. One classical and well-known example is Breaking Bad.
Yes, at the very beginning of the story, a gifted chemistry teacher, Walter White, found out that he was terminally ill and wanted to leave some money for his family. By chance, he cooperated with his student, Jesse Pinkman, to produce drugs. However, he gave up the chance to escape from the old business and died alone due to his ambition and obsession with power as an ex-drug producer.
The romance of the tragedy of Breaking Bad is reflected by Walter's failure to escape the road of drug production. The thrilling experience of Walter brushing shoulders with death every time makes the audience very exciting, but it could not cover the original hardship of the character. After countless bitter inner struggles in his mind, Walter still decided to make drugs to save money for his family, so his family even don't understand him, which made Walter a classical character of tragic individual heroism.
I agree. As an imperfect person pursuing material wealth and satisfaction of self-esteem, Walter White exhibits a sorrowful and tragic sense of nostalgia since he fails to provide his family a better life though he exhausts himself to sink into the business of drug. In this circumstance, since readers will tend to sympathize with his persistence and sacrifice for his family, such nostalgia transforms to an image of lonely and sacrificed hero, which produces sense of romance in audiences of perspectives.
With the analysis, back to the main topic, though Walter's story is thrilling and contagious, the presence of the crime drugs is weakened. The symbols embodied by drug abuse about its harm and illness addressed by protagonist fascinating adventure and his individual heroism. It includes a more significant point. When audience realize the tragic ending of Walter, who is eventually corrupted by power and die alone, Walter's identity of drug dealers diverts audience attention to the origin of anti-hero. The audience sympathy for the protagonist clues them to mediate about the circumstance around Walter. Then they will realize anti-heroes emerge not because of all accidents, but the oppression of overwhelming power, which enforces people passively choose to resist and become the member of anti-heroes.
In general, the overwhelming power in anti-hero televisions is the outcome of neoliberalist. Can you introduce this new concept to our audiences? Kaiji.
Yes, neoliberalism supports an excessive power of private company and anti-unionism. In this case, the wealth will be shifted to the upper classes, and urban citizens are increasingly deprived of the power to shape the basic conditions of daily life, which are instead shaped by companies involved in the competitive economy. This well explains why heroes in anti-heroes movies are usually resisting to something rather than rescuing or saving something. Many anti-heroes are generally people at the very beginning. However, because of pressure brought by evil but anti-sonant and powerful company, those general people become anti-heroes and passively against with those powers. For example, before Walter White became an unscrupulous villain, he initially became a drug producer as a resistance to hopeless status quo and unfair social treatment caused by such an invisible pressure such as betrayal of partners when Walter was in gray matter technologies.
I got it. Neoliberalist is a significant part of the ideology of capitalism. Let's begin the discussion of a couple of excellent examples of anti-hero televisions criticizing neoliberalist.
In the story of Breaking Bad, Walter becomes an anti-hero trapped in a false plight called Man's Responsibility. In the fifth episode of the third season of Breaking Bad, Mass. In the clip, Gustavo Fring, the thoughtful gent drug dealer, tries to use his parenting responsibility as a man and his belief in chemistry to persuade Walter White, the institutional genius who decided to quit, to return to the drug business. In this clip, the author did not use any additional background music and sound effects, where Gustavo Fring also lowered his voice to increase the sense of oppression.
When you have children, you always have family. They will always be your priority, your responsibility. And a man provides.
The uneasiness brought by the sense of oppression not only reflects Walter White's indecision, but also implies that Gustavo Fring, as the head of drug industry, tries to create a sense of responsibility, essentially instigating others to become a member in drug business, to trap Walter White. Thus, Walter is forced to become an anti-hero again to save his family. Walt sees his inability to provide adequately for his family as a failure on his part to forcefully secure a better job, or his failure to stay on with Grey Matter, the business that he confounded instead of the cultivation of years of neoliberal policy, making that has resulted in institutional failure on the part of the state. Waters summed up the problem as his own lack of ability, and the overpowering of private company has resulted in the lack of due treatment for those who should be respected. A chemist who are contributor to the Nobel Prize even needs to wash car as part-time jobs while teaching in order to make a living. The state should pay his salary.
It's quite profound. I believe there is another apparent example criticizing neoliberalist cyberpunk edgerunners.
That is, first of all, the development of punk culture itself is similar to the development of the genre of heroism. Punk was originally created by British young people who were pessimistic about the future after World War II in order to express strong emotions. Movies and TV shows of heroism were also created after World War II, talking about the hope brought by superpowers, where Captain America is some example. However, with the development of neoliberalism, anti-hero, which is closer to ordinary people, is more in line with the taste of the public. Therefore, punk is regarded as an abstraction of anti-heroes, used by people to express their pressure and emotion. The story of cyberpunk happens in metropolis ablaze with lights. However, in the corners, there are a mountain of dilapidated muddy streets with poor and cynical people. The advancement of animation contributes to a better expressiveness of the sense of contrast between things, emphasizing rebellion, dissent, and maverick. These dangerous qualities are often romanticized as subculture elements. Compared with Breaking Bad, cyberpunk depicts a more intuitive social problem. In the world of cyberpunk's edge runners, because private enterprises are too powerful, the gap between the rich and the poor makes the society only include the bottom and upper classes. The middle classes is eliminated. The life of the bottom people is described as the combination of low life and high tech. In this situation, everyone at the bottom cannot fully trust each other.
What's an anti-utopian society? Hence, there will not be a united force against the control of companies and upper classes.
That is, Protagonists David and Lucy can appreciate each other since they can trust each other in such social circumstances, where trust has eliminated. The romantic relationship also attracted a lot of younger audience. Accordingly, when the tragic ending befell on the couple, David was killed, he was unable to fulfill Lucy's wish of flying to the moon together. The audience will empathize with the tragic protagonist, which makes the audience abreact their trauma to the powerful companies that oppress the lower class.
This technique of critics of neoliberalist is undoubtedly ingenious, so powerful corporations have always been a very significant role of potential villain in the background of cyberpunk.
True, overall, David Martinez, the protagonist of the story, is one of the victims. When his mother is killed by a random gang violence in the corporation-ruled cyberpunk cesspool known as Night City, David had the chance to have a stolen super-speed granting implant, which provided him the power to be against with the control of Night City. While treason of friends and brutal violence lurk around every corner in Night City, he and his accomplice struggle to survive in a cruel society. However, as anti-heroes, they are monitored, framed, and eventually killed by the group company one by one. Compared with Breaking Bad, the criticism expressed by this anti-hero's tragedy is more straightforward, as the actual image of powerful company does exist in cyberpunk, when the effect of neoliberalism of Breaking Bad is an invisible but powerful abstraction.
We have nearly arrived at the end of the podcast. Sorry for any spoilers today. According to our discussion, we know neoliberalist is a branch of capitalism accidentally motivating the abuse of power as private companies. The last question is what is the solution of plights brought by neoliberalista?
My suggestion is to abandon internal friction and take actions unitedly. It might be a little bit confusing. It's like capitalism preaches individual freedom, but the actual result is that people lose their freedom, even everything. Such abstract perspective focusing the inner side not only neglects the issues of circumstance, but also conceals the fact that many people actually do not have personal freedom living under daily pressure. Furthermore, such mentality that considers the origin of issues comes from us further isolates ourselves from others. In Breaking Bad, Walter's family usually lose their trust to him. Even though his partner Pinkman has been through a lot with Walter, they still usually have trust crises. In the end of Breaking Bad, Walter also deceived the closest people like Pinkman and even tried to kill him. It is more apparent in Cyberpunk. The Cyberpunk society only have lower class and upper class. Since people in lower class always swindle each other, they are powerless to be against with the control of upper class and powerful companies. However, this kind of passive and powerless mentality, isolated and differentiates interpersonal relationship, is the key to capitalist wanton exploitation of employees. Maybe every employee is scolding the boss, but they can't really win the actual rights and interest, because they can't organize effectively and resist capital together.
Yes, have you heard about the UC strike happening recently? Universities didn't pay teacher assistants, who were adjunct graduate students, the salaries they deserved. Therefore, the teaching assistants decided to unite in protest in order to protect their legal rights rather than giving up the resistance due to their students' identities. They are anti-heroes in our real life.
Correct. The impact of neoliberalism does not grow so fast in several decades before. However, when we could observe that the pressure of later generations increases due to the workload, living pressure, and society's exploitation to them. People want an anti-hero born among the general people to change current situation. However, from my perspective, the plight could be overcome only if everyone is anti-hero.
Impressive answer. Seems we're running out of time for the podcast. Thank you for sharing your opinion, Kaiji. For the audiences, if you have not watched Breaking Bad and Cyberpunk Edge Runners, I will strongly recommend watching them. See you in the next podcast.